Hello and welcome to the NFU's Shed Talks podcast. I'm Jax Weaver and I'm joined by my co-host Mike Greenwood-Wilkins.
Hello everyone, it is super exciting to be with you. This is very lovely.
Coming up in today's pod, we continue our honest conversations. We talk to farmers about the big issues affecting their tenancies.
To be able to move forward in life, you've got to be like water. You know, when you come to a rock, you've got to be able to flow around it.
Our team in Westminster have had an exclusive interview with the new Tenant Commissioner, Alan Laidlaw, and they have been lifting the lid on their new farming fellowship with MPs.
When you step back from the difficult conversations, quite often you can end up saying, well, I know we're in a difficult position, but I'm not sure I know how to get out of it. And I think that's where we can really make a big difference.
Plus, from cybercrime to war, how ready should we be for the next international crisis? We speak to Finland's leading expert on emergency preparedness.
Your household needs to be prepared. We are not only prepared for the war, of course that's one scenario that we may face. I would say every winter we have some kind of blackouts of energy and so on, so you are probably quite well prepared.
So, hello, Jax. This is super exciting, isn't it, that we are finally getting to do our first podcast. All of our listeners have now met all 6 of our new presenters. How are you feeling?
It's great to be here, Mike. Really enjoy working with you on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to having a chat later on.
Yeah, definitely. So, Jax, introduce yourself a little bit. You and I have known each other for many years. We were actually at university together, which is lovely. But tell our listeners at home who you are and what you do.
I am the Regional Policy Manager for the NFU South. I started with the NFU about a year ago, and what a year it's been. Had a lot going on. Really, really enjoy working for the NFU. Really great team, great members. I married into a farming family just north of Bristol. So feel like I am having a baptism of fire on agriculture, but really, really loving it. And what do you do, Mike?
I am a farmer down in Wiltshire. We are on a family farm here doing predominantly arable, about 2,000 acres, some of which is in-house, some of which is contracted. And then we also have a menagerie of rare breed native livestock. So we've got British white cattle, Oxford sandy and black pigs, Wiltshire horn sheep, some more goats, some chickens, some ducks, and a donkey as well, just to throw in a little bit more. And then I actually got involved with the NFU through being one of the NFU Student and Young Farmer Ambassadors a few years ago, and then joined our county management team as Vice Chair of Wiltshire, and now I also sit on National NFU Crops Board as the South Region Delegate.
Well, I think that's incredible, Mike. There's been a huge amount going on in the news, and I think one of the biggest wins we've had for a little while is the extension of the Countryside Stewardship. We've successfully secured a 1-year extension to the Countryside Stewardship Mid Tier agreements, which is going to be huge for thousands of farmers who are going to have 1 year's respite and a little bit more security.
Definitely. Speaking from personal experience, we missed out on getting an SFI scheme on the farm at home this year. We were in the middle of putting together an application and didn't get it in time. And with Countryside Stewardship and SFI being closed, our current Countryside Stewardship scheme is about to end. And it's just going to be a cliff edge. Nothing's going to replace it. And I've been really, really worried. And I know the NFU have been pushing for this. And so I am so pleased that we're going to be able to roll on. It's not perfect. And we still need a bit more information about the options within the stewardship agreements that are going to be able to be carried on. And obviously more than a year would be much better security. But at least it's something, and it is some more funding coming in. I know the NFU have been pushing loads because DEFRA had told us that the SFI replacement would be announced in summer 2025. I don't think anyone can argue that the end of October is summer 2025 and we still haven't heard anything. So it frustrates me no end that we still haven't heard anything. And I know the NFU has been banging on that door from DEFRA and not had anything. So at least this is something positive that we can have and work towards. But it is very much not the end, unfortunately.
That's quite right. And for those who haven't heard the news, it was confirmed between the DEFRA Secretary of State, Emma Reynolds, and the NFU President, Tom Bradshaw, on the 14th of October about this 1-year extension, and there'll be lots of info online.
Thank you for Tom for meeting with Emma as well, and obviously a new team. It's been so much for them to kind of get to grips with the new team in DEFRA. But yeah, for the fact that Tom, it was said to him directly from Emma, and it's an announcement thanks to what the NFU have been doing, I think is brilliant. So thank you to them.
And it's been actually a week of wins. Great that we've got some good news on our seasonal worker scheme. After years of campaigning, we have secured a change to the seasonal worker scheme, which is allowing workers to re-enter the country sooner than they'd previously been allowed, which is going to allow them to chase the picking seasons, essentially. Due to take effect from November, it's going to allow horticultural workers to come into the UK for up to a 6-month period in any 10 months.
And speaking as a member who has nothing to do with horticulture at all, it wasn't until I got more involved with the NFU that I realised how massive the horticultural sector within the NFU is. So this is such a massive win and will be such a huge benefit for so many members. And it's something that has been asked about for so long. So I am so pleased that this has happened. It is amazing.
I agree. Some much needed stability for some big members, some smaller members, and that security for next year is just going to be really, really great, especially as we're getting into planting time of year.
So obviously it's absolutely wonderful to have some positive news stories to talk about. Unfortunately, a little bit of negativity in the news as well. There was a bit of talk in farming press that maybe there was going to be a U-turn on inheritance tax coming in the budget. Angela Eagle said on Farming Today on October the 17th that speculation is not true and there is no likelihood of a U-turn, which is obviously really disappointing for so many of us. I can say, however, that the NFU are working so hard on this still, and reassurance to members, that's not it. We're not giving up, but obviously just not the news that we all necessarily wanted to hear.
Now, moving on, we were at our tenants conference, one of the first we've had, which was just brilliant. And Mike and I took some time to speak to our 3 farmer panellists and explore their stories and their businesses.
Which is always my favourite part of any conference or event, getting to listen to actual real life farmers. It's great listening to experts, but actually hearing what farmers actually have to say and think. And real life experiences is wonderful. So we're joined with Gary, Sam and Andrew, and I'm just going to pass over to each of them in turn to introduce themselves, where they're from and what they farm.
Hi, so I'm Gary Yeomans. I farm near Abergavenny in Monmouthshire, and I milk goats and got Welsh black suckler cows and a bit of arable.
Yes, I'm Andrew Baxter, farm in South Worcestershire, and we farm beef and arable and a few store sheep.
Hello, I'm Sam. I'm a dairy farmer from Stafford in Staffordshire.
Andrew, something that you mentioned in your talk at the conference earlier was about the is it tenant club that you've set up at Croom on your estate, so pulling together of all of your fellow tenants to sort of have a collective voice when talking to your landlord. I thought it sounded like a really genius way of sort of giving yourselves as tenants much better armoury in discussions with landlords, because you do hear some horrible stories of tenants who are sort of bullied or pressured by landlords or agents, and sometimes you really can feel on your own. What sort of advice would you give for other tenant farmers up and down the country to set up a similar grouping? And do you think it can work cross-landlord? Obviously, you've got a big landlord in the National Trust at Croom, so you pull together in that way, but could it work across a region, within county farms? And what advice would you give for people setting that up?
Yes, I think you could probably spread it across a wider area and more different landlords. But I think the beauty of the Croom Tenants Association is that we are all on the same estate, and we have very much the same issue with our landlord. And it was born out of very high rent increases being demanded by the landlord in the mid-90s. And at that time, a number of us were fairly young and new tenants, and we were more than happy to have that conversation. The previous generation, my father probably never talked to his next door neighbour about what he was paying, and the neighbour wouldn't have talked to him about it. It was a very secretive thing, and I think that was a mistake. Yeah, we were more open, and I suspect the next generation is probably even more open in some ways to discuss other things as well. I think that the success is because it's specific to our landlord and our particular estate. It probably would work, but I think it might be a bit more watered down if you tried to include other estates. County councils definitely are, but county council tenants have gone through a pretty dreadful time. I suspect they may well have some sort of tenants organisation as well. But yeah, it's strength in numbers, isn't it? And that's, I think, where we scored. And hopefully the landlord realised that, he did have to rein himself in a little bit.
Definitely. I think often you do kind of still even now hear a bit more about people feel a bit secretive or don't necessarily want to be completely open and transparent talking with neighbours, and it's really refreshing to hear you speaking. Not only have you done it, but that you found it to be a really good and positive thing. And just briefly, has your landlord seen it as a positive thing? Have they been supportive of you as an organisation?
I'm not quite sure about that. They accept that it's there, and I think it tempered their ability to go out and try to rattle tenants. And I think part of the psyche behind it from the landlord, I might be, wrongdoing them, but if you go in with a big figure and so on, we're all much more protective about what our rents might be and so on. And when you get sent a Section 12 and there's a rent review coming up, it does take up quite a lot of your time and thoughts. Whereas the landlord, and he's dealing with hundreds of other things, and he'll put it down and pick it up, and we will mull it over longer than we probably ought to, but it's because it has such a bearing on your particular situation. So, I think overall that the landlord accepts that the Croom Tenants Club is there, and it helps in other ways because we are able to pull together on other things apart from just rent reviews. And they've called us all to various meetings. We've had meetings on biodiversity, net gain, and they're obviously looking at that, and that's another story, and so on. And it was interesting to hear what people said today about that, and that sounds quite a scary proposition to have to be going down at the moment.
Brilliant. So lovely to hear farmers pulling together.
Gary, this one's for you. The theme of today in the conference has been growth and opportunities. As we've heard from Sam, there are a lot of opportunities in these gentleman agreements. A couple of acres here, take this for the summer. You mentioned when you were speaking earlier that you'd had a bad experience with a gentleman's agreement. Don't worry, I don't want you to go into it, but what advice would you give to somebody, perhaps somebody younger or somebody starting out who is being offered something down the pub? What words of wisdom would you give them?
Just be careful. Some people don't always turn out to be gentlemen, but generally...
We are talking about some land down the pub, not anything else, just to clarify. Nothing too dodgy.
Yeah, trust is a big thing. I've got a couple of things that are done on trust and on a handshake, but sometimes it's better to steer clear of land dangers, isn't it?
Sam, I just wanted to touch on you about county council farms, because they can provide such an incredible opportunity for people, but they are becoming fewer and further between. More are being sold off, more are being used for biodiversity net gain developments and things like this. You spoke very well earlier on about how the transition from where you've been for the last 8 years on your starter farm and moving into a progression farm, and the difficulties that you have had around that and what you've been offered by the council in terms of the amount of investment that it requires. What should we, again, as an NFU, what can we be trying to lobby to council farms and council districts to be able to better support you in that transition in growing your business? Someone like you, you're so passionate, you're so enthusiastic, you're an amazing farmer. They should absolutely be wanting to hold on to you and not giving you more difficulties to make your business more successful.
I hands down think that the county council is by far the best landlord to give any new entrant a start. They've been amazing. They really have. And to take me on at 21, I couldn't believe it. I was very lucky. They've never, ever once got in the way of anything that I've done. They've always been there until we started looking at the whole starter farm against progression farm. And they invite the starter farm tenants to look around the progression farms when they're available, hoping that the starter farms people will move to the progression farms, create new opportunities, etc., etc. The trouble is, the starter farms, who are having a throughput of younger generation, i.e. myself, we're enthusiastic, we're doing a little bit, everyone's done a little bit. The starter farms, all of a sudden, have taken over the progression farms in, they're a lot more farmer friendly, everything's more up to date, a lot more things comply with, regulations such as EA and all that sort of stuff. And when you look at a progression farm, 9 times out of 10, you've got a retiring or an aged farmer who has just started seeing the days out maybe 5-10 years ago, and all of a sudden you've got a dilapidated farm. And how are you supposed to move to that as a progression farm because of some historic law how are you supposed to take that on as a progression farm, which needs a massive amount of investment to bring it up to any sort of speed? But the biggest problem with that is that you're only moving to gain between 10, 20, 30 acres. I know for a fact that I'm speaking for a lot of people that are on starter farms in my area. A prime example would be, I had a neighbour, maybe he's been moved 18 months now. He was across the road from me, amazing farm. The council actually put a new shed up on it not long before he went there. I wouldn't say he got forced, but obviously everyone's, wants the security. So he went for a progression farm to gain the extra years on his tenancy. And still to this day now, he's milking less cows than when he left the starter farm because the infrastructure's not there. Yeah. The council said that they were going to provide the infrastructure, but didn't. And that's a massive problem for my business.
I was sad to hear that you've not been able to access funding grants and things like that, because to my mind, grants and help and assistance in that way should help people just like you that need the leg up and need the support to build your business. I've had lots of people say to me that having to pay for grants 100% upfront and then claim the money back is nonsense, because the reason I need the grant is because I don't have the money up front. What do you want us to be asking the NFU to be lobbying government to say to better format those kinds of grants and funding so that someone like you could access them and could actually make a benefit to your business?
When you running a business on a shoestring as such, it's hard to take lumps of cash out to pay for something and then sit and wait for something to come back. I've never really looked at it as a problem. I knew that I needed the equipment that was available, even though it was on the grant. To be able to move forward in life, you've got to be like water. When you come to a rock, you've got to be able to flow around it. And I've never actually thought about the problem of paying for things up front, i.e. on the grant, because I've dealt with it in other ways. From the NFU's point of view, I mean, it's not just to new entrants like me. I think most businesses within farming, no matter what you do, we're all sort of asset rich, cash poor maybe. So I wouldn't be wanting the NFU to point massively at first generations or new startups for help with purchasing grants on a more understandable basis, i.e., how you have to pay for them. I would imagine that would need to be out to the whole of the farming community with all of the ongoing issues and pressures that every farmer faces.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I did just have one last question, same question to you all, just to finish up. Thinking about growth and opportunities, I wanted to ask, how important do you feel your local community, your family, the farming community, the NFU is, and what opportunities does having that community give you as a farmer, food producer?
Certainly in Monmouthshire there's a very strong farming community and good agricultural societies, albeit there's a lot of older gentlemen that are involved in many of them, but there's a good sense of community. We've got a market and that sort of thing, and it's important to know what's going on and who's moving, who's thinking of retiring, and what opportunities are there. So, I think it's good to be involved in community and know what's going on in your local area, because it does open up doors for you.
I think first of all, thing to say is that NFU gets lambasted an awful lot, but we'd be all in an even bigger mess than we are now if we hadn't got it. And we all ought to remember that when the union reminder renewal fee comes round, which of course is right on the doorstep now. But I think the farming community is generally very supportive of each other, and there's nothing better than getting in the pub with some other farmers. And at the end of the evening, you normally feel better, perhaps not in the head, but you actually shared your problems, and you just feel that the other people are in the same boat as you are, and it's possibly not as bad as you think it is. And you need to get out, and you need to be able to talk with other people about lots of different things, and the farming community generally does that, but sadly there are the odd occasions when it gets lapsed.
We weren't the only ones at our tenants conference this week. The wonderful Rory from our external affairs team was also there, and he had the opportunity to interview Alan Laidlaw, our new tenants commissioner.
So let's go straight to our wonderful Westminster team right now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Westminster segment of the NFU's podcast. I am Rory Hodges, the External Affairs Advisor at the National Farmers Union, and I am joined by my colleague Neve McGinty.
I'm Neve. I'm one of the External Affairs Managers in the NFU's Westminster team. Been at the NFU for nearly 5 years, coordinating our political lobbying and parliamentary activity, of which includes running the NFU's MP Food and Farming Fellowship Scheme, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Before we go into that, I just wanted to have a quick chat about the Tenants Conference that I was at yesterday in a very autumnal Malvern. We had a chance to speak to Alan Laidlaw, who is the first Tenant Farmer Commissioner for England. Let's hear what Alan had to say.
Where I see opportunity is for the changing circumstances of the sector is to have flexibility, to be able to work with landlord and tenant, with professional advisors to say, what is it that we want to achieve from this piece of land, this asset, this farm, this area of ground? And how do we best get the best outcome for that? And for many people, the engagement of an agreement with a tenant is a great way to manage that asset without necessarily having the entrepreneurial expertise or the farming expertise to do that. And with change, I think, comes those opportunities. But I'm not naive enough to think that it isn't tough out there at the moment. In today's conference, conference chair David was very clear about some of the challenges that are out there in the sector, and I'm not immune to hearing about those either.
How are you going to make sure that landlords, tenants and their advisors know about this code of practice? And what do you consider to be the most important part of it?
The last part of that question is probably the simple. It's the fact it exists. Already this morning, I mentioned it in my presentation to the conference. 2 people have come up to me and said, I'm going to take a better look at the code of practice. And if we can get more people looking at that code of practice, wherever they sit in the industry, whether they're a tenant, whether they're a landlord, whether they're an advisor or whether they're a project manager, they can say, how am I behaving? Turn a mirror on yourself. Am I acting in the spirit of the code? And if not, what does that have impact-wise on the other side of the conversation? So I think that's the way that everyone should engage. They should be aware of the code. They should have read it. They can have a well-thumbed copy on their desk, and every now and then they should look at it and think about, how do my actions sort of align with the code? And I think that, the code was developed with the forum, with membership bodies like the NFU all represented. So it's been a well-considered industry-led piece of advice. And I think for me, that I would want to ask is, if there are problems in a certain relationship between parties, why does that come about? What are the motivations? Why have we got to the position we're in today? And then to reflect on how could the code have helped, where are the code being followed, where's the code not being followed, and then go from there. And to just have some of those conversations. Because I think when you step back from the difficult conversations, quite often you can end up saying, well, I know we're in a difficult position, but I'm not sure I know how to get out of it. And I think that's where we can really make a big difference.
So we have done a bit of crowdsourcing with NFU members who have given me a list of questions that they would like me to ask you.
Great.
So the first one that we've got is, as the Commissioner for Tenant Farmers, what would you say to tenants who fear being bullied?
Whether you're a tenant, whether you're an employee or a contractor, you should have the opportunity for safe enjoyment of what you're meant to be doing. And there's no place for bullying in life, whether it be our kids in our schools or whether it be in a professional context, in a workplace or in a farm business. So I want to understand why that bullying, if it is bullying, is happening, and really, to have a view on what that looks like. We are dealing with commercial negotiations, and commercial negotiations will not always mean that everyone is happy with the outcomes. But it's about how things are done, how things are communicated, and really having the dialogue there in an appropriate manner. You can deliver difficult messages in a way that is constructive and collaborative, and think about your impact on people. So I think from my perspective, I would have a very strong view of bullying at any level. And then quite often we have to be clear about what that means to people and really look to support them to make sure relationships can be as constructive as possible.
What are your thoughts on the lack of schemes and added complications of SSSI for tenant upland farmers?
I think at the end of the day, I want to be able to promote a thriving tenanted sector. And if schemes are restrictive or not able to be accessed by tenants, then that's probably going to counteract the work that we are trying to do within the Commissioner's office. So I would want to be able to work with the Farm Tenancy Forum, with colleagues in DEFRA and with policymakers to say, how do we make sure that as many schemes as possible is accessible for tenants and for owner-occupiers on an equal basis, because that's how we'll get the most out of these schemes and be able to have the impacts that those who design them want to achieve. So that gives me a chance to be able to input into policy discussions through the Farm Tenancy Forum and through DEFRA colleagues to be able to say, this is an important sector. Upwards of a third of farming businesses in England are involved in tenancies in some way. Why would we look to exclude them from those schemes? And that's a question that I can regularly ask. And I've already done it in my first few weeks to DEFRA colleagues to say, have you thought about this? How have you thought about what the impact for tenant proofing on these schemes is? And just keep turning up and having those conversations, as the NFU have done, as other membership organisations have done over the last few years.
Will tenant hill farmers be taken into account in the 2050 DEFRA roadmap?
The short answer, I think, is yes. I was at a meeting the other day and was able to ask about the engagement with the tenant farming sector, with membership organisations, and I must say all the questions I asked were well answered and pointed back to NFU, TFA and others about, how the engagement happens, but also were very open and followed up very quickly with a conversation to say, look, we want to know more about what's happening in the sector. So I think we can only take that at face value, and that's something I would like to see. One or two people have said today, has my role, has my office got enough teeth? If I don't need to use teeth, that's probably a good thing. I know I will have it at some point. But within DEFRA, they are very open to engaging with me and my team. The response from the Secretary of State, from ministerial level and from director level within DEFRA has been excellent. And I will just capitalise on that and make sure that we can champion tenant farming in those corridors.
So moving on to our last question. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and you have the misfortune of having just been made Prime Minister. What is the one thing you would change?
Wow, that is a question. And it's interesting that you frame it as the misfortune of being Prime Minister. It's a really difficult one because everything in land management and property and farming in rural areas is so nuanced. And there's so many levers that a Prime Minister has to be able to pull. I am a big believer in the economic viability of farming having a real impact in rural communities. And I'd like to see the point where all sectors of the farming community are being paid a price that reflects risk, it reflects reward, and it really reflects the value of our food. I fundamentally think that there's a disconnect between the consumer and the farmer, and I would try in that complex landscape to make sure that there's a real fair value from produce from land, because I think that could help solve a lot of our problems.
Thank you very much for taking my questions, and again for joining us today in Malvern.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, that was so interesting. It sounded like such a great event. What were your key takeaways from all of that, Rory?
We've obviously been calling at the NFU for a tenant farming commissioner for what feels like a very long time. And Alan is the first one to take up the position. And as he has got a new role, it feels like he's able to mould the position to what he thinks would be good for it. So as he mentioned at the conference, he's building up a team, he's getting these resources together, and he's going to be representing the tenant farmers with the code of practice and whatnot, which is good. But it does feel like he is open to being the champion for tenant farmers within DEFRA itself, which, again, not going to sniff at, not going to be unhappy with. The other thing as well is that he is very cognizant of the problems that tenant farmers face. So he did speak about, for example, the financial pressures that have come out of, about SFI, or we did very briefly mention it, IHT. He spoke about the extreme weather pressures that farmers have been feeling, particularly within the past year. But he's also cognizant of the opportunities that are available in tenant farming, and he is saying that we do need to grasp them as a sector. So I think that was very interesting to hear.
Oh, thanks for that, Rory. It looked like a really good turnout at the event. What was kind of the mood amongst people there? What were people thinking? What were their key takeaways?
Yeah, so there were a good number of members there, very happy with the turnout. And of the ones that were there, a lot of them wanted to have their conversation with the commissioner. So when I was going off to do the interview, it was a bit of a struggle trying to, pull him away from everyone, because people were wanting to have their conversations with him about a multitude of issues that they wanted to raise. Having spoken to a couple of them, they did come out and feel like that they had been listened to, and that they were quite happy with how the conversations went, and they were happy with how the commissioner handled himself.
He's going to be a popular guy.
So, Niamh, you mentioned at the beginning of our segment the Food and Farming Fellowship. For the members who are listening who might not know much about it, do you want to tell us how it works, what it is?
Yeah, so we launched our MP Food and Farming Fellowship for the first time this year. And the reason we did that, the most important thing for us in external affairs, as lobbyists, whatever you want to call us, is having really positive working relationships with MPs. But I guess it takes time to craft those relationships and build up what we call a bit of a champions list. So that means having a list of MPs we can turn to table parliamentary questions, submit debates, flag things to ministers, basically using them to get NFU talking points on the political agenda. Now, if you cast your mind back to the last general election, which I think we're all low-key still recovering from, that was quite a crazy time to work in Westminster.
Traumatic experience.
Yeah, no, I think probably more so for you working in Parliament at the time, Rory. But yeah, if you cast your mind back to that, we obviously had a change of government, and with that came a lot of fresh-faced MPs, especially rural Labour MPs. But in addition, we lost a lot of MPs there as well, who also stood down or lost their seats. So as a team, like after the election, we essentially looked at our champions list and went, oh, brilliant, I guess we're starting from scratch again here. And that's really where the NFU Food and Farming Fellowship scheme was born, to target those newly elected MPs from all of the parties to get them up to speed with all things food and farming as part of our sort of general election, post-general election strategy and engagement.
What does it actually entail, the Food and Farming Fellowship programme?
Yeah, so over the past year, our fellowship MPs, they've done a number of visits across the country, getting a really, really brilliant insight into the food supply chain and all of the different sectors. We've had the chance to work with some fantastic sponsoring organisations to really help us make the scheme what it is. So British Egg Industry Council, Arla, ABP, Barfoot's, AIC and Fairshare. Like, a big shout out to all of these guys who did such an amazing help coordinating visits. And I think the main thing with this scheme is that we didn't just want MPs to be sitting in front of a screen and listening to a presentation. We wanted to make it insightful, but also as hands-on and as interactive as possible, basically like a school trip vibe. Yeah, and to anyone who's ever organised a school trip, big respect from me, because Rory, I don't think we've ever been so stressed doing head counts really on those visits, have we?
The worst one for me was when we were on that train down to sort of Bognor Regis, and for some reason, I don't know why these train companies like to torment me so, but they split the train halfway through. So one went to Horsham and one went to Bognor Regis, and I was very worried that we'd lost half the flock when we were about to move.
Like, honestly, is it worse, like, losing school kids on a trip or MPs? I think it's probably comparable, to be honest. So they've done all kinds. They've been grading eggs. They've got in the milking parlour. They've had butchery workshops. They've been out in the fields. They've harvested courgettes, which was a surprisingly good workout, wasn't it? And they even did a cooking challenge using surplus food when we went to visit Fairshare. And we have to shout out Dr. Ros Savage MP and James Naish MP, who won that challenge with their 10 out of 10 carbonara. But yeah, in all seriousness, through doing that, we could really demonstrate not only how important agriculture is, but also really what we need from those MPs to help it thrive.
I know when the first one was launched last year that it was very oversubscribed and you had to put a bit of a wait list on. I understand that the applications for next year's Food and Farming Fellowship are open. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So our cohort have now officially graduated. They are NFU Food and Farming Fellows, and they'll be having their graduation ceremony in a few weeks. I really want them to have caps and gowns, because I feel like this is what people must feel like when they send their kids off to uni. Feel so proud of them. So obviously we've had our cohort now who've graduated, so applications are now open for next year. Not sure if we have any MPs who tune in, but if you're there, hello, we'd love to hear from you. But equally, anyone listening to the podcast, out there who, has a good relationship with their MP and thinks they might be a good fit for this scheme, we'd love to hear from you. So do send us a message, nfufellowship@nfu.org.uk. Applications are open, and yeah, drop us a message.
So, other than the fellowship, Neve, what else has been taking up your time this week?
Well, it's been another crazy week in Westminster. So we've had our uplands groups come and visit us this week. So they've been in Parliament lobbying their MPs, promoting their uplands vision. So that was a really great event. They've also been in the office meeting with DEFRA leads and stakeholders, which was, really great. What about you, Rory?
And I won't go into too much detail because I'll keep you on tenterhooks and give you a bit more of an update on rural crime in a later episode. But one thing that we've been working on for a very long time is the Equipment Theft Bill, which was passed in the last Parliament by Greg Smith MP. But for that to take effect, we needed the government to publish what they call statutory instruments, which is just a piece of secondary legislation to give effect to the primary act, I should say. That came out, and we're happy with some of it, but it is a little bit of a lost opportunity for other things. So one of the things that they've not included in it is large agricultural vehicles and the theft of them. Let's say your tractors, that's not included. So we are going to be doing a bit more work on it, and I will give you more details on a future episode.
And that's all from us today. We will see you next time. But before you go, don't forget to look at the show notes where you can find more info about our MP Food and Farming Fellowship Scheme.
How wonderful they're listening to our external affairs team. As always, I love the Westminster bits. I find it absolutely fascinating and such a great opportunity to speak with Alan. Also, if you guys haven't heard about the MP Fellowship scheme before, please do look into it. It is absolutely brilliant. It's such a fantastic way of getting MPs engaged with farming and agriculture, especially those who maybe don't know that much about it. So if you've got a local MP that is not involved, please send them the details. We're really always looking for more MPs to join the scheme.
Now for something completely different. Mike and I are going to be chatting to Mika Ilomäki, who is Finland's emergency preparedness expert. Does anybody out there have a 72-hour plan? Could you survive for the next crisis? Let's find out.
The idea behind there is that every household should be prepared for 72 hours. It means 3 days. And because you have to understand, Finland is a large country. We are really long country, and only 5.5 million people living in here. So your household, you cannot relate to your neighbors because you probably don't have a neighbor if you go to up north and so on. And the local stores, they might be really many kilometers before you find the nearest shop. So that's why your household needs to be prepared. We are not only prepared for the war. Of course, that's one scenario that we may face. I would say every winter we have some kind of blackouts of energy and so on. So blackouts in electricity. So if you are living in a countryside, you are probably quite well prepared.
You mentioned the war there as well, because obviously Finland, for those that don't know, you share a very long physical border with Russia, don't you? So I suppose it does make so much sense to have a culture of extra preparedness for, if the worst could happen. But we've seen across the whole world the last few years with the global pandemic, supply shortages all around the world, in supermarkets. In the UK, I think 5 years ago, or before the pandemic, people maybe wouldn't have expected that supply chains could break down so quickly. And we've had shortages of fresh produce, eggs, lots of shortages on shelves in supermarkets in the UK. And I think it took a lot of people, a lot of consumers by surprise. How could we learn from what you're doing and implement it in the UK? Do you think it's something that, obviously we've got a much larger population in the UK, but we do have a lot of rural communities, isolated people. Do you think we could replicate that somehow? Do you think it would be a benefit for us as a country to do?
Yeah, I think, of course, it's not something that works here in Finland, might not work in the UK, but one of the ideas also that is something that I see is a really valuable thing is the private-public partnership model that we do here, that we discuss a lot of with the business part of the different companies, because we are a governmental office, but we also understand that the private companies are the ones that are reacting much faster. Because, for example, if there's some kind of disruptions in the logistics side, they are the ones who get the call first that, hey, this ship is not like coming to the port, or there's vessels are not like there's something happening in the Baltic Sea. So they are the ones who get the message really, really fast. That's why we have this communication between the private sector ongoing all the time. And the idea within our model is that if, for example, if a logistics company, they realize that there's something wrong in the supply chain, it doesn't work, they give the information for us and we share to the other sectors, for example, food sector or water supply sector and so on. So we are kind of like hub here for also giving information to different sectors. And I think this is something that every nation or country should have. And also that is something that we are actually like suggesting that we could do this kind of like public-private partnership program also within the allied countries. We are now also NATO members for 2 years now. And also we like to think that this could be also working in the EU level. EU is really important to Finland. We are like here up north, one of really like cold countries in the Nordics. So we do also need the support from the European Union. So it's something that we always like present that, hey, you should do this kind of like public-private partnership thing in your country too.
So, Mika, you mentioned the different sort of exercises for preparedness that you do. Could you kind of outline a bit more what they are and what they look like? Do you take like an event like a theoretical pandemic or a theoretical war or a theoretical cyber attack? In the UK, we've had so many high-profile cyber attacks to big companies, food companies as well, supermarkets like M&S and the Co-op here. Have had food supply chains completely disrupted by cyber. So do you take a scenario like that in principle and then run an exercise on how you'd cope with it, or how does it work?
Yeah, exactly. That is the kind of like what we do here. These are like tabletop exercises that we do. And it's a lot of like participants of these exercises comes from the private companies. They're specialists in our exercises, and yeah, every time we do have like one or two exercises per year, and every exercise has different scenarios. It's usually a 1 day exercise, and we start from one point, and then it levels up, and we do have like different scenarios, different thing happens, and then it's also for the, let's say, players to like develop their mindset to understand better what they should do in a real life situation if this would happen.
Amazing. That's so interesting. I think like in the UK, you hear of that type of thing being done for like dealing with a terrorist attack or something, but I don't know if we do it for a food security risk. And I think having seen the shortages that we have on shelves, it sounds like such a sensible thing to do, and maybe something that we should be lobbying and asking our government to do. So thank you. It's fascinating.
Mika, on the exercises you've just described, do you have a equivalent to the NFU, so the National Farmers Union in Finland? And do you include them, if you do have one, in those conversations and those exercises?
Yeah, we also do have Farmers Union here in Finland. It's actually Farmers and Forest Owners Union. So we do include them, and there's always they are the ones are participating these exercises. But it's more on the business side from the, for example, seed companies or the ones that are providing different inputs for the agriculture. Since there is like 40,000 farms, you cannot have like farmers in these exact exercises. But we also, as a national emergency supply agency, we do have different like seminars and also exercises for farmers only. And it's also a different kind of like situation where the farmers take part of these exercises.
Finland has recently joined NATO. And I wondered, obviously, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a massive contributing factor as to why that is. But does that help now being part of NATO with things like food security preparedness? And does NATO help you with that? Or are you able to feed what you're doing back to NATO and help the broader NATO community with being as prepared as you are for dealing with the worst possible scenarios?
Yeah, I think it's both. It's also something that we get from the NATO. There's a lot of like preparedness planning done into NATO, and it's something that we don't need to do it all our by selves. We get the information now from the NATO and from the headquarters of NATO and so on. So it also helps us, and of course we like to think that we also add something for the alliance. For giving the information and things that we've learned during our time here in our country, and how to cope with the location that we have and so on.
So I was reading about the strategic grain reserve system that you have, which includes storage of wheat and oats, barley, rye, and I think all of those core grains and cereals as part of diets are so important. And you have this system for stockpiling them across the country. How does it work, and why is it so important for your food security?
Yeah, the government owns the grains that we stockpile here in Finland, but the stockpiling is done with the private sector. So we don't have like the silos where the grains are not owned by the country or the government, but the grains are. At the moment, we have 9 months worth of, how do you say it?
Like 9 months worth of supply.
Exactly. Yeah. In the
what kind of tonnages is that then? What sort of tonnages would make up 9 months of supply for Finland? Do you know the population of Finland? I don't.
The population is around 5.5 millions. Okay. And the exact amounts of the grains, we don't say it. It's classified information. Yeah. So that we only say the timely. Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking to an agent, like a secret agent now, and when you get told, no, I can't answer that question because it's classified.
Yeah, some of our work
you just became
classified.
so. Yeah. You already were cool in my head, Mika, but now you're so much cooler. Oh, wow, Jax, wasn't that so cool? I feel like we've just been speaking to Finland's answer to James Bond when he started talking about classified information. I was like, oh, I've never felt so important. That was brilliant. Thank you so much to Mika for speaking to us. We're nearly coming to the end of our first podcast, Jax, which is quite mad and very, very cool. One thing I wanted to say to all members, because my county advisor is shouting at me all the time for this, in the most wonderful way, because she's lovely, but membership renewal packs will have fallen on your doormats very recently. So if you haven't already, please read through them, read through all the wonderful wins and positive information in the renewal packs, and get your renewals paid, please. And that will make every county advisor in the county very, very happy.
What an episode. So much fun. Some really, really deep issues we've got into as well. The next episode of our Shed Talks is going to be with Luke and Bizza, who are going to start talking a little bit more about the family farm tax. So please do keep an eye out for them. If you like what you've heard today, please check out our show notes. Also, subscribe and perhaps leave us a little review if you have enjoyed it.
Especially if it's a positive 5-star review, please. Thank you guys so much for listening. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time, but we'll leave it in Luke and Biz's safe hands in the meantime. Bye.